Hello, everyone, and welcome to the VO Dojo 21 Questions. I'm Tish Hicks, the Master Sensei of the VO Dojo, based in Burbank, California, and I am super excited to be joined by Dr. Joel Snyder, who is our guest for upcoming Ask the Sensei and is specializes and is a pioneer in the realm of audio description, which is an interesting and powerful addition to any working prose diversified voiceover portfolio. It's a very specific approach, or specific part of the voiceover realm. Dr. Joel, thank you so much for being here. Do you call yourself Dr. Joel?
No, no,
Uh,
Joel, please.
Joel, okay. Joel Snyder,
Yeah,
PhD.
that's right.
For your
The
talk
PhD
show.
actually is in audiovisual translation and audio description. It's related, obviously, but
Right.
I'm relatively, let's see, that my PhD was in 2013, so it's
Mhm.
relatively young as a doctor of something
Excellent.
or other. But and anyway.
Like Doogie Howser.
Yes, there you go, something like that. Well, what's interesting is the study of audio description is really very limited in this country. My
Mm,
PhD is from the Universitat Autonoma de Barcelona, and studies of audio description happen there, in the UK, in Germany, in Italy, primarily, a few other countries. But and the interesting thing is that it is considered a part of audiovisual translation, meaning subtitling, dubbing. Dubbing is another voiceover activity that some of your folks may know about. But all of that kind of thing is so much more important in other countries because so much media comes from America
right.
in English, and then it has to be translated or localized, if you will, with subtitles, with dubbing, with captions, and now with audio description as well, which is primarily about making visual images of film and television and other art forms accessible to folks who are blind.
Right, right. That is fantastic and opens up so many questions.
Oh
Let's start with the beginning of the 21 questions so we can ask some questions to get to know you. Um,
yeah.
so, what would be a one-word check-in for you today? Like right now, right here, what's one word to describe your state of being?
Yeah. Boy, one word, that's tricky. I guess I'm going to say synergy.
Synergy.
Um, and the reason for that is that I believe there's a synergy between the writing of audio description. Audio description really is a literary art form. It's about words that are crafted by an audio description writer who may or may not be the voicer of those descriptions. For media, usually not. In my own company and for a number of other folks, I write description, or I have writers that write description that I've trained, and I voice it because that's part of my background. But
Hmm.
there's that synergy between the two things
Mm.
that I think is especially important, perhaps more so than uh, voicing a 30-second spot or some kind of narration or whatever. So,
Hmm. Synergy. Yeah. And what is the name of your company?
Audio Description Associates,
Hmm.
LLC. And I do a great deal of training of audio describers through my company. I
Hmm.
do a number of audio described tours for museums or visitor centers. And I do a good bit of description for media, um, television, film, private companies that produce a lot of media, that kind of thing, and have an interest in making sure that the work is captioned and audio described. So
Hmm.
that's where the bulk of my work. And then I have a contract with the American Council of the Blind to as I'm the founder of and senior consultant to the audio description project of the American Council of the Blind, which is an initiative that really promotes audio description. We have a number of different projects, programs that we have, awards for the best in audio description, that kind of thing, training institutes, conferences. We even have a contest for blind kids who write reviews of audio described videos that they have access
Oh,
to.
fantastic.
And they tell us, why did you like this? Was it because of the description? What about the description? Did it work well? Was it voiced well? What? And they write little reviews, and we give awards, cash awards, to the top ones and their teachers and all of that. So
Fantastic. It,
yeah,
it really is, it really is entering a whole realm of a
yeah.
whole nother realm. And where,
Which is, as I say, there are dimensions to it beyond just the voicing. We think
Mhm.
of the whole audio description process as being three parts: the writing of the description, the voicing of the description, and then the audio editing of the description. And by the way, people who are blind are increasingly part of that production of audio description. This came from blind people, and I was there in 1981 when it first started, for performing arts and theater. And it's great to see that some of the best voice talents for audio description are people who are blind. Some of the best audio editors are people who are blind. And even with the writing of description, I think most you run into people who are blind, who blind meaning low vision or totally blind. I want to be sure that's understood. You have people who just have fallen in love with audio description and have trained in it. And even though they may not be writers, they can't see anything, perhaps, they find a way to contribute as quality control experts.
Oh, right. So if someone writes something, then they can go, I don't see
Yeah,
it, or let me ask a
that's right.
question so I can see it. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. And there are even a few folks who, I have my friend who knows about description, and that person's sighted, and they'll tell me what they see, and I'll ask questions, and that allows me then to write description. So it's there. The point is, nothing about us without us. People who are blind, involved in the production of audio description. And let me plug the website for the audio description project, because it really is a wealth of information about description, and that's simply ADP, Audio Description Project, .acb.org.
Excellent.
And my own website is just audiodescribe.com. So
And where are you from, and where do you live now?
I am in the People's Republic of Tacoma Park, Maryland, which is a suburb of Washington, D.C., right? It abuts the nation's capital. And this is where I'm from, actually. I was born in Washington, D.C., and have been around, living in a few other places periodically for school or this or that. And I travel a great deal to train audio describers and to speak on audio description. I think probably I know 40 some states and over 60 countries now. So
Wow, it
yeah.
really is. You're really making an impact. And what would we know your voice from if we have heard, like, is there a particular series or a film that if we listen to the audio description, you're like, oh,
Well, it's possible. It's possible. Right now, uh, my company does a great deal of work with Vitac, which is the nation's largest captioning company. Uh,
mm-hmm.
and we handle a great deal of their audio description. In particular, for one big contract is for Microsoft. I mentioned private companies that have a real commitment. Microsoft produces more video, I think, than Hollywood.
That's
It's
interesting.
amazing, and they get it described. So we do that for them. And so if you listen to any Microsoft commercials, or if you work at Microsoft and are privy to some of their internal videos, that
Right.
kind of thing, you would hear my voice. Some of them I may have actually written, but I have a stable of writers that
Mhm.
contributes the actual scripts. And then
Oh,
I voice most of what comes out of my company, because that's part of my
because it's
background.
your company, yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
in years gone by, I did any number of feature films. Um, I remember when I even discussed this with George Lucas himself, as a matter of fact. I did the description for two of the Star Wars films when they were broadcast on television.
Oh,
So that
interesting.
was early on, a good, oh golly, 15, 20 years ago, something like that.
Wow, that's so fascinating. What my brain goes to is like, wow, all of the different realms of voiceover. Like you just described that there's audio description for corporate narration. There's
Oh,
audio
yeah.
description
Oh, yeah.
for feature. Wow,
Yeah,
that's
well, there's corporate narration, obviously somebody who's the representative of the company or is
right.
doing the basic narration. And then audio description is typically inserted in the pauses, the natural pauses between bits and
Mhm.
pieces of dialogue or critical sound elements. And that's where our writing comes in, and that's
Right.
where our voicing comes in. So it's a complement to the narrator of that particular commercial or
Hmm.
piece.
Yeah. How long have you been doing this work?
Oh goodness. For
See,
more years, for more years than you've been around, Tish. I just met you. I just met you. No, 40, 41, 42 years.
Wow, that's fantastic. And also, thanks.
Well,
41.
I just met you, so I'm going from, your
That's great. So you really have been at the forefront of this, or from the very beginning of this, right?
it started
Right.
in 1981,
Mhm.
with Arena Stage, performing arts
Right,
space in
right.
Washington.
Hmm.
It was the brainchild of, well, a number of people built up to it, but at that particular point, there were two blind people on a accessibility committee for Arena Stage. And Arena had them on this committee. At one meeting, they were presenting their brand new assisted listening system,
Hmm.
which is ubiquitous now, but it was brand new in those days. It's simply a microphone on stage. Somebody who has trouble hearing would get a headset, and it allows them to boost the volume. Well, Margaret Fansteel and Chet Avery on the committee thought, this is wonderful. But wait a second, if it's just a microphone on the stage, couldn't you have a microphone off stage and have someone voice description of critical actions or visual elements? To their credit, Arena Stage said, huh, yeah, it's a two-channel system. Why not? Let's give it a try. And
Hmm.
Margaret was the head of something called the Washington Ear. This is another voicing opportunity for folks, usually done by volunteers around the country. The Washington Ear is a radio reading service. And there are, well, at least a dozen of them around the country that provide readings of newspapers, books, magazine articles on usually it's a sub frequency of an FM radio station, and people who are blind can get a special receiver to hear those readings. Nowadays it's all digital, and so they can access it over their computer, that
Hmm.
kind of thing. So I had been a reader for the Washington Ear throughout the 70s, which dates me even further. Um, so Margaret ran the Washington Ear. She started the Washington Ear, and then it was about in 80, 81 when she was on the committee at Arena Stages. She said, well, look, maybe we can figure this out. So she came back and grabbed me, and I had a background as an English teacher and in the theater as an actor and voice talent, and a few others, and we hammered out, how would we do this? What would we even call it? So that's really its beginnings. I hasten to say, and you're in Burbank, so I want to give credit to a fellow Californian, Greg Fraser, a sighted man who in the 70s actually wrote a master's thesis at San Francisco State University about same kind of thing. He didn't call it audio description, but he
Hmm.
had a good friend who was blind, and he began to think about how would we make movies accessible? Rather than me just sitting here whispering to my friend, how could
Hmm.
we make it part of the film, if you will? So he was
Right.
the first to really publish writing on and a bit of research on audio description. And so it dates even back to before the 80s. When I teach description, I go back much further.
Mhm.
prehistoric times of, one caveman saying to the other, there's a mastodon coming from the left. Look out. He was a Jewish caveman. Anyway, or he's from Brooklyn. Anyway, that's description. One guy didn't see something, and so you describe it. Greek times, it was referred to as ekphrasis, description of visual elements put into words. And even you may not know the name Fiorello LaGuardia, who was the mayor of New York City in the 1940s. This is apocryphal. There was a newspaper strike in the 40s, and that was a problem. In the 40s, people got their information from the printed newspaper or from radio, and this strike went on, for at least several weeks. And Mayor LaGuardia decided to plunge in and try to help. Now, he wasn't on the side of the newspaper publishers. He wasn't on the side of the workers. He was on the side of his people who were missing the newspapers. And what's the first thing you turn to in the Sunday paper? Come on, Tish. Well, I don't know if you get a newspaper these days, but
what is this?
Yeah, right. Yeah. Sunday newspaper. What do people think of? Sunday newspaper. It's in color, right?
Comics, the comics.
Comics. Thank you. All right. We've never met before. I didn't prompt you. Mayor LaGuardia went on the radio every Sunday morning and read the comics to the people of New York City while that strike was going on. And he very quickly realized, oh, I have to describe the images. I can't just read the words. So he was a describer. Ronald Reagan was a describer. He was, he began in the arts and whatnot as a radio announcer, a sports announcer. And he would describe baseball games that were going on in New York City. He was in Illinois. He would get a ticker tape saying ball one, ball two, strike one, pop fly. And then he would invent the game in his head and describe what he figured was going on. And that was a kind of a special. I like that because he was using his imagination, and good description writers have to use their imagination. Sometimes describing something that isn't even on screen helps you understand what is on screen. Right. So that's where imagination and creativity comes into play.
That is fantastic. Now, it sounds like audio description has become your main focus and how you make your living in voiceover. Do you do other voiceover work, or is this the focus now?
Well, yeah, I do periodically. Back in the early 80s and late 70s, I made my living as it wasn't SAG-AFTRA in those days. It was as an AFTRA voice talent. I joined SAG. I'm a member of Actors Equity as well. So for about 5 years, I did nothing but commercials and narrations and a lot of radio work in particular, or the voice of certain television commercials. But and it was great. But as I became more and more steeped in audio description, I started focusing there. Plus, I was also doing theater. I was also working as an arts administrator, running theaters, and for 20 years, I was giving away your tax dollars as a art specialist at the National Endowment for the Arts. So all of that was kind of keeping body and soul together. But yeah, I've been doing nothing but audio description since 2002 or so, something like that.
Excellent, excellent. And this next question we usually ask in terms of how people maybe articulate their representation team or something, but it sounds like you have a team that you work with to do this work. So who is your current team?
Well, yeah, the way I've structured my little company is with really no employees except me. I guess I'm an employee. I am the company, but it wouldn't happen without at least, golly, a dozen writers that I use over time. And usually they're people that I have trained in one country or another, or one session somewhere. Writers. I have a couple of different audio editors that I work with, although one in particular, Bill Parks at Dominion Post in McLean, Virginia, He and I have worked together for 20 years or something. He's an expert audio editor and an expert in audio description, especially. Um, and then I use a range of voice talents. Honestly, most of the work coming out of my company, I voice because that just makes most economic sense. But sure, I need female voice talents. I need other male voice talents from time to time. So people send me their demos or their websites, that kind of thing, and I use other folks, and especially if we do audio description in other languages. We specialize in English mostly, but I've done description in probably 10 different languages over the years. But we don't specialize that. We don't look for that work, but people come to me with it, and so yeah, we turn to native speakers in Spanish or German, Hebrew, Portuguese, Chinese, and so on. Because it is worldwide now. It is. I did a survey with the World Blind Union several years ago, and I think it's 71 countries. There's some sort of description, and most often it's television or film.
Yeah, that's interesting. And in terms of like your technical setup, what is your recording setup, or what is an ideal setup for audio description?
Well, for people that are voicing description, everybody in your audience, I'm sure they have their own little mini studio in their home. I have one here, which is the underneath the stairwell type thing, but there's a fair amount of space there.
In the Harry Potter studio.
There you go, which I did up, soundproofed, and there's a computer there and monitor and
and tape that goes across so nobody walks while you're
oh
recording.
yeah, well I've got an on-air sign, and it's pretty secluded. I try to, but yeah, so it's a fairly neat, fairly nice voicing setup. The most important thing, and I'm not telling you anything you don't know already, but it's my way of thinking, is the microphone. And really the computer and the software, sound editing software. There's so many different choices, but the microphone is so critical to getting a good sound. And I'm not a technician or an audio editor myself, so I'm repeating back what I've learned and heard from
And
others.
what is your setup like? What is it?
Well, like I say, it's a soundproofed room that is the underpinnings of a stairwell, but it's a fair amount of space. And if you're going to ask me what microphone I have, I'm going to say, oh, I have to go check. To be sure, I believe it's the top of the line Audio Technica, but there are a slew of different microphones that you guys know better than I about that. I used to go to Bill Park's studio to do voicing, and then we realized, I could do the voicing by remote just as easily, and send him the wild voicing, and then he inserts it into the video or whatever. So, because it was a good 15-mile drive to his studio. He's in Virginia. So we started working by remote that way. And then, of course, COVID really requires that to a certain extent.
Right. Now, when your setup is not working to picture because the description is all written, right?
But depends.
When you're working on a script,
the description is written by someone else already. But no, I have the picture there too.
So you can see what it is that the words are describing and bring it together. Yeah.
The people writing are working for me. I'm responsible for the product. So it helps me check what they're writing. Now, I have some people that have been with me for years, and I train them and I trust them implicitly. So there are times some companies don't even bother with voicing to picture. They simply read the lines wild, and Bill, my audio editor, will have the video and piece it in there. I think it's best to voice to picture because I think it helps you as a voice talent have a sense of what it is these words are describing. That will inform you. Again, we're getting to that synergy between the writer and the voicer. It helps you understand what was the writer thinking. It's based on this image. Okay. And voicing description, I oftentimes say it's more about what's up here in the noggin bone than in your voice,
Mm,
because it requires that kind of in the moment analysis of the visual image with the words. How do they fit?
mm,
How are the words in consonance with the image? Picking that up, and that's something you think about, and it comes out in your voice. You
mhm,
have to be able to read time code and a line
mhm,
and the image all at the same time, and you
mhm.
got to be able to do it quickly,
Right.
because time in studio is money, and you don't typically we used to say for a half-hour television show, depending on the complexity of the show, a good voice talent should be able to voice it in 15 minutes,
Mhm.
because they can go cue to cue to cue. When somebody is having trouble, then the half-hour show takes an hour to voice the description, which
Right, right.
is not optimal, really. The writing of the description takes much, much longer, uh,
Mhm.
because that's real study and analysis of the images and
And then
coming
distilling it into
creative to the
the
words.
technical time
Oh,
constraints too,
oh yeah.
right?
And my
Yeah.
training is focused on the writing. We do talk about vocal skills and work with it a little bit, but there are others that are excellent voice talents for audio description and do workshops for voicing of description.
Mhm, mhm.
I like to think, though, that the best voice talents not only have the vocal chops and understand description, but they really kind of have done some training in audio description
Mhm.
creation. Then they understand the process better.
And
I
you
think that
understand it from the inside out and
absolutely,
all. And
absolutely,
oftentimes it seems to me that the folks that I know that are working quite successfully in audio description, having being able to be versatile. I can write and voice. I understand
sure.
the process is
It
makes
makes
you
you more marketable.
that much more. You can always have all of those skills
It
working.
makes you more marketable to the description producers in the country. They are hiring writers, they are hiring voice talents. Now, they have
So.
somebody that can do it all, probably not audio editing, well, because I haven't met the person who
Right.
is in all three areas.
Right.
I mean, even myself, and again, I'm dating myself, but I still, when you say audio editing to me, I think of Scotch tape and a razor blade.
Back in the day.
I used to play with just silly stuff, play with audio editing and sound on sound, and it was all reel to reel tape, and
Right.
that's how I did it. So now, of
Going back
course,
to the Greek times, right?
oh yeah, now you have Avid and oh golly, all the different kinds of
Yes,
software packages
absolutely. Yeah.
that yeah. So anyway,
What would you say are or were the three top ingredients in your success? What would you say the three top ingredients?
you know what I'm going to say first and foremost is an awareness of the audience
Mm-hmm.
for audio description. Most people, even who are writing description, they're doing it at home for Netflix or for this company or for that company. Netflix probably hires description producing companies, but they're doing it at home. The writing, the voicing is certainly being done by remote.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they've never met someone who's blind, and I think that can't help but to um, be picked up in the voice. Um, there is just no getting around it. If you have never met somebody who's blind and you meet them on the street or in a restaurant, typically a sighted person will sometimes come off a little patronizing, a little condescending, or silly things like, "How are you? Are you?" Or they'll ask the person with the friend with the blind person. They'll say, "What will she have to eat?" What you know. Anyway, things like that. So knowing your audience,
Mhm.
Having skill with language is a
Mm-hmm.
second thing. And then, yes, the vocal chops are critical, have
Mm-hmm.
been critical to being able to voice the various programs that I've voiced, not just television, film. But when I started out, I was doing mostly performing arts, do a great number of museums and narrations, that sort of thing now as well, including the White House and other famous museum
Mm-hmm.
tours, visitor centers. So
That's cool. That's
yeah.
super cool. Excellent. I think you might have talked about, but what would you say would, and this is always a trick question, what would
Oh,
you say is your big break? Because I think often that we go like, oh, well, was that a big break? I think a big break is kind of I'm not sure if it's a thing, but if we were to ask that
yeah.
question, what would you say?
It smacks of somebody being an overnight
Right,
sensation,
exactly.
and there is no overnight sensation because that
There, but
person's probably been doing it for years, and
Right, but there might be a moment where things were one way and then this happened and then it opened up to what
yeah,
was next.
yeah,
So that
yeah.
might be
No, that's right, and it's luck more than anything else. The fact that I in the early '70s I had already been acting, and I was in undergraduate school, and um, enjoyed language and writing and such, and wanted to. I had heard about radio reading services and thought, well, that might be interesting to do. It'd be a chance to work with my voice and with pronunciation and such. So that is a break in a way that I was able
Mhm,
to, and I had to audition for that job, even though we were volunteers, but it was a significant audition to be
mhm,
qualified to work at a radio reading service. And then that's what led directly to the development of audio description in the early '80s.
mhm.
Uh, so that with respect to audio description, that's where I would kind of trace it
The
to
turning point. Yeah.
in a way, yeah. In fact, we began doing it in theater, and um, in the mid '80s, uh, Barry Cronin and WGBH in Boston, they
Hmm.
had heard about what we were doing, and Barry in particular knew that there was a secondary audio program feature for analog television in those days,
Hmm.
um, that was used for Spanish translation. When he heard about audio description, he said, "Well, that would be the ideal way to transmit audio description." In
Hmm.
fact, in Washington, we even tried once over our FM signal. We tried to simulsync what we were doing on the radio with a television broadcast. Guess what? It doesn't work. There's latency issues. There's all kinds of problems. But WGH figured it out, and they came to us, and we actually did pilots for them. I wrote and voiced three of the first television programs that ever had audio description,
Oh,
1985, and so that's kind of a break, if you will.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And that's the pioneer part of your journey.
Sure, sure,
Yeah.
sure.
Um, what are you proudest of in your voiceover career?
Oh, golly. Well, one thing popped into my head that is has nothing to do with audio description, but for nigh on 40 years or longer, I have been the voice of Santa Claus on. I don't know if I'm proud of this or not, but
It's awesome.
What better thing for a good Jewish boy to be doing at Christmas time than being the voice of Santa Claus on. Uh, Typically, it's been at news talk stations that they've got a break, and oh, we have Santa Claus in the studio. We're going to interview Santa. And
Fantastic. That's
so
great.
I either by remote or I go into the studio. I'm there, and I go, "Hello there, this is Santa. Merry Christmas. Tell me, Tish, have you been a good girl this year? I will check my list twice, and I'll make sure you have an extra special Christmas this year. That kind of silliness.
That's
So
fantastic.
as far as I'm proud of the work with audio description, and
Right.
and something else that I think I touched on briefly. when audio description first started, and in the training of writers for description, we talk a lot about subjectivity versus objectivity. If Tish, if you're sitting there and I had to describe you to somebody and you've got tears streaming down your cheeks, you're crying, you're sad, you're distraught. I've never seen you this upset. Now, would that be a good description? Well, no, because I can't see sadness. I can see the outward manifestation of someone who's distraught, and I can say those things, what I see. But in point of fact, Tish, you just won the California lottery. You're not sad at all. You're crying. So if I said you were sad, so this idea of keeping things objective in a certain way was taken to heart by voice talents, and early audio description voice talents were referred to as golf announcers. Now she does this. Now he's doing that. Now they're doing this. Now it's the other way. Now I see, almost like whispering. And bowling programs back in the 50s were done that way too. Like we don't want to disturb the bowlers. Well, this description has nothing to do with disturbing anybody. And it was, some companies still have a bit of that. It's a little disconcerting, I think, if you've got a happy scene and the description voice talent is going, monotone.
Right.
Well, a sad scene, and you've got no. There has to be consonance between between the tone of the voice and what is being described. Caution: it is not about you, the voice talent. It is not about, you're not in the movie. You're of the movie. And the best compliment you can get is, you disappeared. I forgot you were there. I got everything, but you merged, you blended with everything. So that's a big point. I mean, a lot of people will say, oh, actors are good describers. Well, first of all, they're using the word describer incorrectly, because they're thinking of the voice talent who is voicing words that a description writer created, right? So that's one thing. Actors, and I'm an equity member, right? We're used to being in the spotlight, literally. And audio describers and the voice talent for audio description, you got to take a step back, because nobody goes to a film to hear the audio description. They want to experience the film. And if you get in the way, you are distracting. And I've seen people who are blind pull the earbud out of their ear and say, this guy, either it's the writing or the voicing, is bothering me. I'll get along without it.
I'll just make my own pictures. I'll make my own pictures from what's happening.
Or I'll say, what's with the elbow, what's going on? What's going on? In a movie theater, that's tough to do, because then you disturb people. But
right. Interesting. Let me reverse these questions. Well, actually, let me put it in a word. What's your biggest fear or challenge in your voiceover career? It sounds like you've been doing it a long time. You're confident. You feel pretty confident. But I think everybody every one of us has something that is either like or it's a challenge, or a new challenge, or has always been a challenge. But
well, again, the writing and the voicing is of a whole in my way of thinking. And I mentioned I've had a long relationship with the American Council of the Blind. ACB has been, I don't think we would have as much description were it not for ACB championing it throughout the 80s and 90s, even to the point of getting legislation passed that there is a mandate for description on public broadcast, not public, right? No, I don't mean PBS. I mean, for television, broadcast television, there is a mandate. It's teeny tiny, but it's there. And hopefully that will increase. But as far as the time when oh my God, what do I do? We used to show described films at the conventions of the American Council of the Blind. And there was one year, it was in Las Vegas, the convention that year. And we'd gotten the okay to show 12 Years a Slave. Remember
Mm.
the film? Wonderful film. I'd seen it a couple of times myself, and I had the DVD with description, which is great. And I left the room to go up to my hotel room to get something. And I came back, stupid. I came back, my computer was gone. It had been stolen.
Oh no.
And they didn't steal the projector, they stole the computer, but the DVD was in the computer.
Oh no.
I had about 45 minutes before 200 blind people were showing up who paid to experience 12 Years a Slave with description. I actually figured out how to download the film, and I did, but it didn't have the description track.
So you were able to, they were
Well,
watching the film, and then
the,
you were,
the first thing
you had to improvise.
the first thing that I said when people were there, I said, you know, I am so sorry. We will reimburse you your ticket price. You know, we just the DVD is gone. I tried to download the film. It doesn't have description. I really, and several people in unison shouted out, Joel, you do it. Now I've developed a lot of respect for what it takes to do description. It takes time. It takes a lot of preparation. And then they were asking me to extemporize description. Thank God I had seen the movie.
Right, right.
Yeah. That's what we did. I had a microphone. We started the movie, and I did it off the cuff, which is especially tricky because extemporaneously, because where you don't know when the pause is coming. I was experienced enough with it to anticipate that kind of thing. You can get a sense of the language and where the phrase will stop, that kind of thing. I've done extemporaneous description for ABC television for the presidential broadcasts, the presidential inaugural broadcasts for 3 of them. And that's the same kind of thing. There's no writing it in advance.
Right.
And there's more and more live audio description on television these days, actually. So anyway, that was a trying
a true test of your skills. Are you an introvert or an extrovert?
Oh, I'm an extrovert. I mean,
extrovert, yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, it depends on the situation, perhaps. If I'm intimidated by a group or whatever, then I'll lay back a bit. But no, I'm an extrovert. My wife's an introvert, and that's opposites attract or something.
That's fantastic. I always find it such an interesting blend in the work that we do. Like, well, I sit in the closet for most of my time, but I really get my energy from people. Yeah. If you could, it sounds like you live this life, but if you could do voiceover from anywhere, where would it be? It sounds like you have created a life doing this work that you are.
Sure. Well, I've worked if you mean, I've worked in many major studios, production studios or video studios, and providing the voice. Most of what I do now is right out of my own home studio. But I really have, well, prior to COVID, I became really well known as not just a pioneer or somebody who's been doing this from the very beginning, but as kind of the go-to person for training and audio description. And so I've had the honor of being able to speak on description or train describers in, like I say, 60 some countries. And that's been great fun. I'm not enamored of the getting there part of it, but once I'm there, I've learned so much about countries, all over the world, in the Far East, in South America, in Asia, throughout Europe, Iceland, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, Africa as well. So I spent a month in South Africa training audio describers, and did work in Morocco and Egypt as well. So anyway, so that's been a real honor and a real plus for what I've done.
Yeah.
Now it's done virtually now, especially throughout COVID.
Oh, right.
I'm still doing a lot of my work virtually, because people kind of got into that in a way. But I am traveling now. I've been in Los Angeles a couple times in the last few months, and going abroad, starting to back to that a little bit. COVID hasn't gone away, and people are still, there are people who are very sensitive to it and immunocompromised. So I'm real conscious of trying to be careful.
Yeah. What would you say your voiceover motto is?
Oh, golly. Well, again, this speaks to the writing and the voicing, but it's show, don't tell.
Mm.
So, for instance, when I did the audio description, the writing and the voicing for television broadcast of a major film from about 20 some years ago, The Color of Paradise, an Iranian film.
Mm-hmm.
Marvelous film. Well, there's one segment where you come up against 2.5 minutes of just hearing bird sounds. I mean, there's action, but if you're blind, you're
It's 2.5 minutes of bird sounds.
you hear birds in 2.5 minutes. And
Mm.
after 30 seconds, it's like, if there's no audio description, I'm out of here, right? Or, what's going on? What's going on? What's going on? So I remember, just as an example of the show don't tell, I think I can actually remember the line that I wrote. Muhammad taps his fingers through a dense cover of brown curled leaves. Now, what does that tell you right away about the setting?
Using a forest,
Maybe
maybe
brown curled leaves.
fall, right?
Fall. Thank you. You don't have to tell people it's autumn. Show them it's autumn, and let them conjure the whatever in their
Mm-hmm.
head. People who are blind are not stupid. They have brains. People who are blind understand color. Even when I say blind, even congenitally blind people, blind from birth, they know what color is. Come on, they grow up in the world. They know that green means money in this country, or envy. Red is warm, or blood is love, whatever. They perceive color in just a different way than
Right.
Tish
It really is. It really is the convergence of the senses, isn't
Yeah,
it?
it really is. It
Yeah,
really is.
that's really
So yeah,
interesting.
show don't tell is
That's
stress.
powerful.
Yeah.
Powerful. What is a typical day like for you as a voiceover artist, or is there such a thing?
Well, the one of my my chief writer is in California and I'm East Coast. So typically she will send a batch of scripts in late afternoon or early evening, and I'm already burned out for the day. So I go to bed early, but I wake up and I see her scripts. And that's probably one of the first things I do after taking my puppy out to walk.
Mhm.
I go down to the studio and I voice the description for the videos that we have on the docket that day.
Mhm.
Uh, and that can be an hour, 2 hours of work at least.
Mhm.
But I'm whipping through it pretty quickly because I know her scripts and I know what I'm doing pretty well. So, but that's the typical day, and then the rest of the day is managing my own company and all the administrivia that's involved with that.
It's trivia.
I don't actually. I'm fortunate that I don't really have to seek work a lot. Got a good
Mhm.
website. People contact me, and I'm developing description for videos that come in that way over the transom. I'm developing proposals for audio described tours of museums. I'm developing proposals for a training session that I might do virtually, or I might, go have to travel to.
Mhm.
So that takes up a good part of the day. And then I mentioned I have a contract with the American Council of the Blind. I'm no longer the director of the audio description project because they brought that in-house as a staff position, which is a
Mhm.
good thing. The audio description project coordinator, but I am its founder and senior consultant. So there are any number of meetings that I go to just manage the audio description project. Over 12 years, it has grown like wildfire, number of different initiatives. I mentioned some of them earlier.
Mhm.
And so keeping track of all of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent. And in terms of how um audio description fits into a portfolio, what what does it like how does an audio description job, how do you quote an audio description job, and what is like how does it fit in? I know like
Yeah.
it, how does that work?
Well, that's yeah, that's a maybe a little trickier in a way than typical voiceover work or traditional voiceover work,
Hmm.
uh, for a couple of reasons. You're not going to send or put on your website just the track of you voicing description. It's not going to make a lot of sense.
Right.
So you're going to get permission to use the original soundtrack of the film or video or commercial and mixed with your audio description voice.
Hmm.
So they can get a sample of what you're like
Hmm.
that way. Um, the other thing that's important to remember is that because audio description been around more than 4 decades, but we're still under known. Uh,
Hmm.
there's plenty of television, there's plenty of videos that don't have any audio description. People don't know what it is, and that includes, to a great extent, I'm sorry to say, um, people at Actors Equity, people at SAG-AFTRA. They're not. We're just beginning to get kind of a recognition in certain ways. Uh, the Motion Picture Academy, Intelligent Arts and Sciences, is beginning to understand. Oh, maybe we should recognize audio description. SOVAS, Society of Vocal Arts and Sciences, just the second year now is acknowledging entries under audio description voicing. I'm saying all that because it's typically not covered under a union contract.
I see. Okay, I see where you
It
can.
can be. I mean, I've been a member of AFTRA and SAG for decades, but um,
It's more non-jurisdictional.
exactly. Boston and LA seemed, because especially because AFTRA is so much about locals, you
Hmm.
know, Boston and LA seem to have enough going on that they've developed contracts for audio description and set rates.
And is
Uh,
it per finished minute or per finished, like how is it more like an audiobook? Is it more like a per project, or how does that
it
per
typically,
word maybe?
no, not word. I mean, you get writers might get into that
Uh-huh.
for translation or something, but no, I usually do it per project,
Mhm.
depending on the total runtime of the film.
Right, and I guess it's also like it would be how complex the film is, right? The
Correct.
the
You could have a
complexity of right
you
of
could have
describing 2.5 minutes of bird song as opposed
yeah,
to
that's right. There you
picks
go.
up a
You,
bucket, right?
that's going to be a lot of voicing of the description, but you could have a half-hour show that somebody gets description for, and it's all talking heads. So there's no place to really insert
Hmm.
description, but they want description. So a half-hour show, and you'll have 3 lines of description. But I would still pay the voice talent a rate for a half-hour show.
Hmm.
But it just depends on the nature of the
Well,
work.
what would be an average of that?
Yeah, that's so hard because it does involve some awareness of the complexity.
Hmm. Here's
But
here's an interesting here's an
yeah,
interesting. What is your pick up the mic rate? Like what as someone I think also as we all explore adding new ventures and new revenue streams,
that's right.
just to understand that what this work requires really shouldn't be done for less than
No, absolutely. The
uh,
voicing is critical.
mhm,
It's just one of 3 elements that are absolutely critical to a successful project. Um, because of the economics of this industry, um, we don't typically the rates are not what I think they should be. If
mhm,
you're voicing a half-hour show, you might get $100, which is
mhm,
low. Now that may only take you 10 minutes or 15 minutes,
mhm,
but it's lower than what it really should be for a
mhm,
good voice talent who knows about audio description and such.
mhm,
Um, and I think we are on the cusp of getting SAG-AFTRA to acknowledge that and to becoming more active with the streaming services and the film producers, so that you know, if you're going to do audio description, you're going to have to pay the voice talents, or your description producer is going to have to pay voice talents a certain amount. They're going to have to use SAG-AFTRA people. There's talk even of the writers of description being members of the Writers Guild. We're not there yet. I think all of that can only add to the professionalism of the field, and that's a good thing. I'm working very closely with a group that's developing a certification program for the writers of description, so that they can sell their services and say, hey, I'm a certified audio description writer. I passed this test or this and that. And so we're developing that, and that's a real process.
And that also seems like, in terms of if you're building relationship as an audio describer, then it also behooves you to be able to do the writing part and get paid for that, because you're building kind of similar.
That would be wonderful. I mean, but many of the folks, your people, they're voice talents. They're not writers, and they want to be voice talents, and they're great at it, and that's what they do. So, but sure, if they really want to get into what audio description is about, absolutely, developing the skills to write it and voice it makes you, I think, doubly valuable for many companies. Again, for my own company, I end up voicing a lot of it because it just economically that makes sense. But yeah, for other companies, I would think that would be, it's going to be the rare animal, I think, who is equally talented in writing and voicing. They exist. I think I'm one of them. But typically people are expert in one area, the voicing, the writing, or the audio editing.
Right. Interesting.
So, yeah.
Good. Well, and last question, Joel. What, knowing what you know now, what would you say to yourself at the beginning of your career?
Well, it kind of is akin to that show don't tell motto, if you will. It would be partly that. It would be partly, it's not about you. It really is about a product, and you're a part of a team. And the other thing is that it's so important to know and believe that there's no good reason why a person with a physical disability must also be culturally disadvantaged. That it shouldn't happen. It shouldn't happen. A movie theater that doesn't have a ramp to get in, well, that means that someone who uses a wheelchair is disabled. But if there's a ramp there, the disability goes away. It's the social model of disability, that disability, people are disabled more by the attitudes of people in society than by a particular physical condition. So if a blind person goes into a movie theater and there's no audio description, they're missing out on film, on television, which are critical parts of our culture. And when you have closer ties to culture and society, I think you become a different person. You become a more engaging person. And indeed, people who are blind, totally blind in particular, have a 70% unemployment rate, 70. And that's unacceptable. But I think, I'd like to think, somebody did a longitudinal research study, here you have some people who are blind who go their whole lives without description. Here you have people who are blind, have lots of access to description. What's the employment rate between the two groups? I like to think that to the extent that somebody is more exposed to culture and engaged with society, they become more engaging individuals, maybe even more employable. But it really mostly has to do with the lack of awareness of a kind of ableism, the lack of awareness of the abilities of all of us, really
Mm.
understanding that a blind person can do anything a sighted person can do, perhaps with the exception of driving a car on
I
public.
was going to say,
Yeah,
yeah.
right. But that kind of thing. And I and there are blind skiers. There are blind sculptors. There are blind restaurateurs. There are blind bartenders. On and on and on. So what
But,
one of the best real quickly that one of the best restaurants I've ever been to is called the Blind Cow. It's in Basel, Switzerland.
mm,
It is run by it was founded by a blind man, a minister, and he was an expert cook, and he got tired of people asking him, how can you cook? What, huh? Well, it's a silly question. So he opened a restaurant where all of the staff are blind.
oh,
The
wow.
waitresses, the chefs, the bartenders, and when you, sighted person, goes to the restaurant, you enter a lighted lobby area where you decide what you want to eat there and give an attendant your order. And then you're met by your waiter or waitress who's blind. And they escort you into the restaurant through a little tunnel that's dimly lit. Then in
Mm.
the restaurant, it is pitch black.
Oh, that's
You have you
fantastic.
have nothing to do but listen and taste, and that's what you do
Wow.
for your meal, and it's a trip. And there are knockoffs of the experience. Sometimes people do like a one night something or other. That's not done well, really. But if you're in Switzerland, Basel, Switzerland, the Blind Cow, the best thing about it is that the food's good. It's a restaurant. So, and you have this added experience.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
And in
Joel,
Switzerland, of course, if you don't know French or German or Romansh or something like that, you're going to be at a linguist. You're going to be in a linguistic void as well. So
right?
you're not going to hear a lot of English. Anyway,
Yeah. Well, Joel, this has been absolutely fantastic to get
thanks, Tish.
insights and a bit about where you of all the good things that you're doing
Oh,
and
great.
how it's part of your life and how your life is impacting other people's lives.
Oh,
And I
thanks.
think that's one of the things at the VO Dojo that we talk about. Voiceover is a great way to make a living, and it
Yeah,
also becomes a way of life. And it
it
seems like
does. Yeah,
you've really
that's right.
embodied that. So,
Well, thanks.
yay.
I
Well, we
think I
look
do.
forward to getting to
Oh,
have you
yeah,
be able to answer other
the
people's
sensei.
questions and
I look forward to it.
insights on
Great.
Ask the Sensei. So, thank you so much. We'll
Thank
see
you,
you
Tish.
soon.